My fellow Americans, welcome to The Celluloid President, the podcast about American presidents on film. Today we're discussing 2018's The Frontrunner, the story about how Senator Gary Hart ruined his chance to be president in 1988. I'm Gary Holmes, and joining me today via Zoom from California is Jim Robinson. Jim, there have been six presidents named James or Jimmy, but none named Gary, which doesn't seem fair. Among all the living Garys, who do you think would make our best president?
Well, if it can't be Gary Holmes, then how about the actor Gary Sinise? He's one of the few common sense conservatives in Hollywood. He's a champion of American veterans ever since he played Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. And most importantly, he's already played a president in a TV movie about Harry Truman. So I'd say Gary Sinise. How about you? Are you going to throw your hat in the ring?
No, I was going to say Gary Sinise too. Not only for all the reasons you mentioned, as well as he has the Gary Sinise Foundation, which has raised over $300 million for wounded veterans, first responders, and their families. So I guessed that you would also guess Gary Sinise.
And I guessed that you would say Gary Sinise.
My backup, Gary Oldman, another actor,
Oh,
who Oscar-winning performance in The Darkest Hour, which we've talked about here, where he plays Churchill. Of course, he's also in JFK. But the best Gary, and I'm not sure that he should be president, is Gary Larson.
who's that?
Because he's the guy that drew The Far Side.
Oh,
He's definitely the best Gary that's living today. But I would say that he should not be president because he's a kind of a weirdo and a very introvert. By the way, I looked up the rankings of the famous Garys, and Gary Hart is now number 50. He's the
really?
50 most famous Gary, which shows how far out of public consciousness he's fallen.
Well, I also wondered if we can't find a real Gary to become president, maybe somebody by another name can become president and change their name to Gary. Because after all, name changes are very, very common among our presidents. You know, Gary Hart was actually Gary Hartpence,
Yeah.
as I'm sure we'll discuss. At least the Gary was real. But there was also President Leslie King, that would be Gerald Ford, President William Blythe, that would be Bill Clinton, President Barry Soetoro, Barack Obama, and who knows, in the not too distant future, we might have a president named James Bauman, or is it James Hamill, both of whom are now known as J.D. Vance. And of, and of course, Sandy Cortez might become president, which was what AOC was always called before she started running for office. So that's another way to get there.
Yeah, it's right. We could have someone change their name to Gary. Absolutely. Because I'm going to point out this as well, that in 1957, the most popular names list, James was number 3 and Gary was number 9. James is still number 5, while Gary is number 1,130th.
Boy, you've really fallen a long way.
Fallen a long way, absolutely. Speaking of Gary Hart, who is now a footnote to presidential politics, but for a while he was one of the hottest figures in politics. What do you remember about him, if anything?
Well, I actually first remember him from 1972.
Mm-hmm.
Remember that race between
Sure.
Nixon and McGovern? It was our
Uh-huh.
first vote, and I was very involved following the campaign. And I went down to the Republican convention, but he was the hip young campaign manager for George McGovern and became something of a celebrity then. He parlayed that celebrity into a Senate seat 2 years later in Colorado, beating an incumbent Republican, and right away was sort of considered a rising star.
Yeah, I remember him as the campaign manager as well. Also in 1984, I was hired to work on President Reagan's reelection campaign, and my first job was to do opposition research on Gary Hart.
Mm.
He was still in the running to be the Democratic nominee. He represented the progressive, highly educated wing of the party, and as you know, as we see in the movie, he lost to Walter Mondale, who was the candidate of the labor unions and other special interests. Mondale, of course, went on to lose in one of the largest landslides in history.
And I wonder how Gary Hart would have done.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
mean, I
yeah,
think
you never know.
I
He
think
would
they
have
say in the
lost.
movie that they actually got caught a break because he would have been he would have lost to Reagan by a landslide too.
I also remember him as one of that new breed of politicians in those days, the so-called big ideas
Yeah.
politicians,
Yeah.
the politicians with the vision thing, as George H.W. Bush sort of disparagingly called it. Bill Bradley, Bob Kerrey, Jack Kemp, Bill Clinton a little bit later. Whether there was actually any there was another matter, but that's how they were packaged and marketed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, he explicitly presented himself as a candidate of ideas, and he supposedly excited young voters, which by that I think means yuppies, the young urban professionals.
Hmm.
I don't think young people who didn't go to college were as excited about him as the yuppies were, but no one ever seemed to care. I mean, when you talk about young people back then, they always assumed that it was college kids, not working class kids.
Right.
No, he was essentially Bill Clinton without the charm. Clinton was as much of a policy geek as Hart, but he had the political skills that Gary Hart lacked.
Yeah. In fact, there was so little charm, at least portrayed in this movie, that I found it hard to believe that he could actually be a womanizer because he had no shtick. He had no he had no routine. Whereas, of course, Bill Clinton, we don't need to say anything more.
All right, let's talk about the movie then. So I'm going to do a summary here. The Front Runner has a pretty simple plot. It begins with a few clips from the 1984 primaries showing how Hart fell short of obtaining the Democratic presidential nomination and jumps ahead to 3 weeks in 1987 when Hart is preparing to run again and is widely believed that he will become the nominee this time around. We see that he's a different kind of candidate, someone who doesn't really like people and thinks he can win on his ideas alone. It would be inaccurate to say, though, that he doesn't like people because he apparently does like a certain kind of person, a woman in particular, and a certain kind of woman. So there are hints that not only does Gary Hart look like a Kennedy, but he acts like one too. So in the movie and in real life, he gets talked into taking a short cruise out of Miami on a boat called Monkey Business, where he meets a pretty young woman named Donna Rice. Soon thereafter, reporters at the Miami Herald get a call from her friend saying that Donna is flying to meet Hart at his house in Washington. The reporters stake out the house and see her arrive, don't see her leave until the next day, and jump to the obvious conclusion. The Herald reports what they saw, and a media frenzy ensues. Both Hart and Donna Rice deny that anything improper happened. Hart tries to put this behind him, but learns that the Washington Post is about to break a story about his relationship with another woman. At that point, he decides to end the campaign because of the damage it's doing to his family, particularly to his wife, Lee, who was trapped for a while in the Colorado house by a mob of reporters. In the end, we're left to contemplate why it is that the media will no longer cover up personal foibles of our political leaders and whether or not this is a good thing.
Well, Gary, that sounds like a movie that would just turn on the entire movie-going nation in 2018, did it?
It certainly did not. When you suggested this movie, I'd completely forgotten all about it. And the reason is because it was a complete bomb. It cost about $25 million to make, had a major movie star, Hugh Jackman, and a respected director, Ivan Reitman, but it only grossed $2 million in the US and 1.2 million domestically for a total of $3.2 million, which is about what the movie Wilson made about Woodrow Wilson in 1944, which was then considered to be a major bomb. So,
Well,
uh,
newcomers to our podcast need to know that we always pick bombs
yeah,
for the most part, or 9 out of 10.
yeah.
We've got a good track record.
I'll
Keep
say that
going, Gary.
this movie did so badly that it's not even listed in the Box Office Mojo list of top 200 movies. It did even worse than the 2000 than the it did even worse than the reissue of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which only appeared in 15 theaters. The top hits of 2018 were all superhero or dinosaur movies. The biggest movie that year was Black Panther, which made $700 million in the US, followed by sequels to The Avengers, Incredibles, Jurassic Park, and Deadpool. Uh, the front runner got mediocre reviews and obviously no award show nominations. So, Jim, when a movie like this bombs so badly, you have to wonder why. It's not a terrible movie, and as I said, it's got a major movie star in it. Any thoughts on why it was such a bomb?
Well, it's not a terrible movie. In fact, it's quite professionally done, staged and acted. But I just don't think the subject matter was timely or provocative enough to attract anything more than a niche audience. For one thing, think about the year it came out, 2018. The nation had already been treated to so much more delicious peccadillos from Bill Clinton to Donald Trump. Obama wrote about his drug use in his best selling books. George W. Bush talked openly about his alcoholism. Fictionally, we saw presidents portrayed as traitors in the show 24, as cold blooded murderers in the House of Cards. So the idea of some politician cheating on his wife on the campaign trail and that becoming a big scandal just seems sort of quaint and not the kind of thing that's going to drive popcorn gorging audiences to movie theaters.
Yeah, in addition to all of that, I mean, I think most people don't know who Gary Hart is. As I said earlier, I mean, he's the 50th most famous Gary in America now. He was a flash in the pan at best and remembered now only by political junkies like us. And also, the movie has no heroes. As a protagonist, Hart is not very sympathetic, but neither of the media. I mean, there's no one to root for. All right. You said you thought it was a pretty good movie. I mean, what did you like about it?
Well, I like any movie that's going to delve into the details of presidential politics and watch a reasonable dramatization of such to be able to peer behind the curtain, so to speak. So I think anyone who enjoys films about politics and about political personalities and all the artifices and rituals and political culture surrounding them will like this movie.
Yeah, I like that. That's exactly what I was going to say too, as well as I thought it did a good job of evoking the late 1980s, through the technology, clothing, haircuts, etc. I mean, it was just kind of fun to go back. I mean, we were kind of in our prime back then, and it's kind of fun to see that era again.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of nostalgia triggering in that sense
Yeah,
because you're right, we were right there in it,
yeah, yeah.
in or around it, and
Around it.
yeah, I also like that the film was as much about the press as it was about politics, the interplay, the give and take, the ethical questions. I'm sure we'll get into that further, and of course they threw in real news clips, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
some genuine personalities, news personalities, and such. And it wasn't a cheesy movie. It had a professional sheen to it, I think.
No, I mean it really does think that and I think it is kind of asking legitimate questions, provocative questions. I also like that it leaves it up to us to decide whether the media is right to report the story. I mean, it doesn't really seem to take sides.
Yeah,
It's a little hard on Hart, which we can discuss later, but the media is definitely not the heroes here.
yeah.
Oh, okay. What didn't you like?
Well, actually, since you mentioned you thought it was a little too hard on Hart, one thing I didn't like is I actually thought it made Gary Hart too sympathetic. This will overlap with our history discussion, but there was a little too much of this is a noble guy who wanted to talk about serious issues, but the press and the public wouldn't let him. I thought that was sort of the one of the main points. And in fact, there were many questions about Hart beyond marital fidelity that went to whether he was genuine or artificial. The name change, the imitative JFK mannerisms, the deep thinker, new ideas, conceit. They could have made Gary Hart into more like a character like that of Robert Redford in The Candidate in 1972, which is a better film than this, and which probably captured in advance more what Hart was really like than this film did. So that was my main complaint.
Okay. I also thought it was a little difficult to follow what was going on, especially in the beginning. I mean, I'm fully immersed in all of this stuff. And it took a long time for me to sort through who was the staff and who was the media. And
And
part of the problem.
which newsroom are they in now?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly. And there was a big information dump in the beginning, and it isn't that clear. It takes a long time. I mean, my wife and I are watching, and she's like, "Who is that? The reporter, or is that a staff person?" I said, "Oh no, that's a staff person." It turned out to be the reporter. So,
Mr. Know-it-all. Yeah.
just to know it all, yeah. And also, I didn't really like the way I felt after watching the movie. I felt like I was an accomplice to watching something dirty. It's just it's kind of creepy to me.
Mm.
Um,
This is not a like or dislike necessarily, but they certainly didn't try to do straight impersonations
no,
of the real life characters. I mean, they were banking, as you said, on the idea that most in the audience had no direct knowledge of what the characters looked like, from Hart to Dole to Bush, and especially Ben Bradley, with Alfred Molina looking about as much like Ben Bradley as Lin-Manuel Miranda did Alexander Hamilton. I mean, think about that portrayal compared to Jason Robards playing Bradley in All the President's Men. I mean, which was a great impersonation.
well, exactly. I mean, Ben Bradley was completely miscast in this movie. I mean, Alfred Molina played Doctor Octopus in the Spider-Man movies. Bradley was an upper class New England wasp, not an overweight schlump like Molina. I mean,
Who was British? Who's British?
British. Yeah.
Um,
Well, go ahead.
yeah, I'll take another one. I wasn't convinced by the nervous Nelly stammering of the actor playing the Washington Post reporter.
Yeah.
Now, maybe it was true, but it wasn't believable to me that a Washington Post reporter on a major beat would seem to be so lacking in confidence and strut, almost prissy. And I think I know why they did that, because then he was basically the reporter that ended up tripping up Gary Hart late in the movie during the infamous press conference. But it just wasn't believable to me that there wouldn't be more bravado in a major reporter in a major newspaper.
Well, especially one that's covering the front runner and is probably going to be the next president. No, I agree. That's actually an excellent point. I mean, that actor was miscast, or the way they portrayed him was miscast. And of course, he's not even a real reporter, a real person. He's a composite of
Mm-hmm.
supposedly of the. I guess this is the decent press, the ones who have qualms about it. And when even he comes around, I guess we're supposed to believe that the media, maybe did the right thing.
Yeah. And just a consumer warning for folks if they watch this movie, don't get behind the wheel of your car after watching this film because you can get drunk just watching it. The booze is really flowing. Remember that part of the late 80s, Gary?
Yeah, I know. This was before Mothers Against Drunk Driving.
Boy, there was a lot of booze in this film.
A lot of booze. Well, that kind of probably explains how he ended up in the situation he was in on Monkey Business. All right. So, what do you think the movie's trying to accomplish?
It was trying to show how the circus side shows of politics, the pack mentality of the media, and tabloid journalism can overwhelm serious discussion of serious issues. And it kind of presented 1988 as the beginning of a new era where personality and personal lives trumps all else.
Yes, completely agree. A secondary argument in this movie, I think, is that when a powerful man gets involved with a much less powerful woman, it's the woman who suffers the most. I mean, Donna Rice is seen here as completely left to the mercy of the media, while Hart is protected by his campaign staff. I mean, this is not a Me Too movie at all, but it's got that little element in there where the men are cads and the women are kind of victims.
Yeah, yeah. I think it also raised the question, good question, which is how much personal stuff is relevant to picking presidents? We can't say none of it matters, but how much of it should matter? That's, I think, a very difficult question.
I think the
Um,
justification in the Gary Hart situation isn't that he had the affair. but that he did it so recklessly. I think that's what they said at the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
Like you judge, I mean, you have to really call it the judgment, you call into judgment of a person who will do what Gary Hart did. Um, if he had snuck around more successfully and more discreetly, that would have been okay. But being on a boat, letting his picture be taken, taking her to his house, I mean, all of that is what was supposedly reckless. I mean, I think
yeah,
that was the excuse.
yeah. Even so, it would the change in politics was brought out directly by the Ben Bradley character when he said, he confirmed. He said, we gave JFK and LBJ a pass,
Yeah.
which is something that's the least that Bradley can confess, since he covered up so much for JFK as one of his best friends. I think there was another purpose of the movie was laid out there inadvertently, and what I mean is that it's that those that consider ourselves smart or want to be smart people can get lulled and fooled by people who are good talkers. And to a degree, I think the filmmakers fooled themselves about a character like Gary Hart. We've discussed before the rise of what I've called the talking professions in politics, law, PR, media, whereby how well and smooth one says things can be mistaken for great intelligence. And being articulate and facile with the language makes us think that they've got big ideas. But that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes people are just good talkers. And I think subsequently to Gary Hart, we've actually seen this borne out in a couple of very smooth talking, slick talking politicians who became presidents. I won't mention any names. They know who they are. And we've also recently seen the reaction to that slickness by someone going out of his way to be totally the opposite, to be coarse and uncouth in his talking. And he knows who he is. So I think that's they let their slip show on this matter by actually thinking that because Gary Hart talked about big ideas and new ways of looking at things, and he was a good talker, that therefore he's deep. Not necessarily so.
Well, I mean, I think we saw that with John Kerry, who was kind of a dumbbell, but was considered to be some sort of intellectual, because he,
Yeah.
presented himself that way. But in this movie, I don't think that I don't think the movie likes Gary Hart, and I don't think the reporters particularly like Gary Hart. He's very arrogant, and his refusal to play by the rules of doing, posing for People magazine and stuff is seen as, a little high-handed, I think. And I personally didn't like him, and I don't think and I think I am made not to like him because he's so full of himself. Ideas. I'm only gonna do the serious stuff. And that's why I say that where Bill Clinton succeeds in a way that Gary Hart doesn't, is because Bill Clinton not only likes the game, but he plays it well. And he was as much of an intellectual as Hart is, uh, in a way that he was very facile and able to talk about the issues. But
Well, that's interesting that so we have a different reaction to the portrayal of the main character.
yeah,
I think that the film portrayed him too sympathetically, and you seemingly don't. So that's interesting.
it is
That's very
interesting. Yeah,
interesting. And maybe I think he was portrayed sympathetically because I don't think I or this movie in particular thought that his wrongdoing was such big stuff. I just I think it was chicken feed.
yeah.
Yeah, cheating on a wife on a campaign compared to, so, as I pointed out, so many of the other peccadillos we've seen in all kinds of public figures before and since.
All right. Well, let's talk about do you the heart of the movie is this intellectual argument that Gary Hart situation changed everything in politics. There was before Gary Hart, and then there was after Gary Hart. I mean, do you think do you think the movie makes that case convincingly?
Only insofar as it shows how the media was the prime actor in changing it. And I think the politicians have always been as good and bad and as ugly as they've ever been. I don't think the conduct of presidents and politicians has changed that much. But I think the media changed. Of course, they were much, much worse in the early days of the country. But I think in modern times, they changed. And, nobody can think of, even imagine a reporter in a press conference saying, Mr. Nixon, have you ever cheated on your wife? In a public press conference. So, I mean, I think the media competitiveness, which is with us more than ever now, and the tabloid style of way of covering presidential politics, personalities over issues, I think they do make that case. And I think the people that come off the worst are the press.
Okay.
What
All
do you
right.
think?
Well, I would say no. First of all, as you kind of alluded to, there've always been sex scandals. Just last movie we looked at, Hamilton, we see Alexander Hamilton being exposed for an affair he had and his career being ruined. Back when Grover Cleveland was running for president, it was revealed that he'd fathered a child out of wedlock, leading to the famous slogan, "Ma, ma, where's my pa? Gone to the White House, ha ha ha." Um, so when they talk about the rules about reporting on the lives of private figures, they're really talking about a conspiracy of silence that's taken place in the aftermath of World War II, when big government and big media, they were basically in bed with each other. This is especially true when well, you already mentioned this too, when J Senator Jack Kennedy and Ben Bradley, the Washington bureau chief of Newsweek, and future Washington Post executive editor, became best friends. Bradley knew all about Kennedy's affairs and kept them quiet. A lot of that coziness ended, though, with Vietnam and Watergate, when the media and politicians became more adversarial. And so, for example, let's not forget that in his book, All the President's Men, Bob Woodward reported that Richard Nixon no longer slept with his wife, which was shocking at the time.
Well, it was seen as so shocking that Nixon accused those reporters of causing Nixon's stroke.
Exactly. Bob Woodward
When
almost killed Pat Nixon. I was
well,
going to say, when Hart says the rules changed, I don't think they changed in 1988 when he was outed, but in 1974 when the short-term truce between the media and political leaders broke.
but just because the incestuous relationship ends, does that mean therefore there are no boundaries?
Mhm.
That there are no areas of private life that can be walled off from the public's consideration of whether someone would be a good president or senator or governor or not? And I think that's, in other words, does it have to be all one or the other? Is, I think, a good question. And I think the media come off as looking pretty bad in this movie because it was more about competitiveness with each other that drove their ethical decisions on what to cover than it was about the ethics of it, the
Oh, you're
decisions
right. I mean, we
themselves.
do see the Washington Herald, the Miami Herald, worried that the Washington Post is going to scoop them, so they have to rush off with their story.
Yeah.
I'm also going to point out, though, that Hart has a point when he says this is the first time the media actually staked out a house to catch a politician in the act, and we look ahead to just 4 years later, when Bill Clinton was running for president. When he was outed as a philanderer, it wasn't because the media reported it. It was because Jennifer Flowers, another woman, came forward and held press conferences.
And had tapes.
Yeah, and they couldn't ignore it. So, the media actually kind of reverted back to their covering things up for Clinton until it was impossible to ignore.
Yeah.
Having said that, another salient example was in 2008 when John Edwards had a baby with a campaign videographer, and the National Enquirer tracked him down, visiting the mom and the baby. So,
Well, look who broke that story.
the National Enquirer, right?
Right.
Yeah, not the. And I guess, is that a legitimate story?
I think these are very serious questions, and I don't think there's an easy answer to it.
I can see, though, why Hart thought the rules didn't apply to him. When he was separated from his wife because of a previous infidelity, he was sleeping on the couch of Bob Woodward, the Washington Post's Bob Woodward. I mean, they even make a joke about it in the movie when Woodward says he won't discuss what happened on the couch. He says, anything that happens on my sectional sofa is irrelevant. So here we have the famous Bob Woodward who brought down Nixon, keeping secrets for a Democratic presidential candidate.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a dash of partisanship in here as well, but I actually think it goes into this pot of stuff that I would call the dumbing down of public discourse and politics. I mean, this is the fun, salacious stuff, but how about all the focus on the horse race aspects of presidential
Right.
contests, all the polls, things like that? Who's raising the money, as opposed to what are their proposals?
All right. Let's discuss the actors. Hugh Jackman is a major, major movie star. He plays Gary Hart. What did you think about his impersonation?
Well, I have to admit, this is the first Hugh Jackman movie I've ever seen. Now,
Okay.
I obviously knew who he was. I knew enough to actually admire his seeming, seemingly intense desire not to be typecast as an action hero, and I think he wants to just maintain his first true love as a song and dance man on the Broadway stage. But I thought he was very good in the movie in terms of acting. He was not good in terms of impersonation. For one thing, he's too good looking and too physically built um, to be a Gary Hart. Um, and acting is mostly about emoting. And he had to play a guy who was specifically unemotive and diffident, and so that was a challenge. But all in all, I thought he carried the movie pretty well.
I thought he's quite a good actor. I've seen him in a bunch of things. I mean, for one thing, he's Wolverine,
What's
and
that? No, I know.
but it's weird. I mean, he's a movie star, and I also think he's not really charismatic in this movie. I mean, movies politicians have a certain charisma to them, and I think they're kind of trying to make just a wholly intellectual person instead of a charismatic figure, but they really either deliberately or unintentionally tamp down Hart's charisma. And he actually did have some. I mean, when you see him, in campaigns and stuff, I mean, in the crowds reacting to him, he just does seem charismatic.
Yeah.
Mm. I guess it's not surprising to learn also that before graduating from Yale Law School, he attended Yale Divinity School because a lot of his speeches were like sermons. And also, I mean, he's so pretentious in the movie. Who gives a reporter a copy of Tolstoy's Resurrection? I mean, that's a lot even for me. I mean, it's so condescending. And in the movie, he's seen as stiff and an unnatural politician. It's hard to understand how he excited people or even got elected to the Senate, never mind almost got elected president. In a way, I actually think that Hart's problem was that he was too much like the reporters who were covering him, in the sense that, he's smart, intellectual. They're all the reporters are educated, the reporters are intellectual, and they can't help but look at him and think, who does he think he is? I mean, that could be me.
Well, it's interesting because I thought for a while that Jackman was almost trying to play Hart like he might have tried to play Obama, because Obama was cool and diffident, no drama Obama,
Yeah, yeah.
and was often standoffish, but somehow managed to package that into a coolness that got people going. Whereas in this movie, anyway, Hart is not shown as being able to pull off detachment as charisma. Obama pulled off detachment as charisma.
All right. Well, Vera Farmiga, I think let me pronounce that again. Vera Farmiga played long-suffering wife Lee Hart. I think she's fine. The long-suffering wife is a thankless role in any movie. What did you
Yeah,
think?
I thought she was good. Um, Vera's a good one of our good Ukrainian Americans,
Right?
Oscar nominee for Up
Yeah.
in the Air. I think she got an Emmy for Bates Motel, and I thought she was good. I thought the daughter was good too. I thought the acting in this movie was generally pretty good.
Yeah.
I thought the Donna Rice character was less so, um, maybe because she was meant to play sort of a pathetic, weak uh, kind of figure buffeted by events. Um, so I wasn't as impressed with her. I have to shout out the Hart campaign operative, Irene, played by Molly Ephraim, who, in a way, I thought was the moral touchstone of the film. You mentioned there were no heroes. Her part wasn't big enough to be a hero, but in a way, it was heroic. Um, she saw both sides of the issue. And in the final analysis, she was more concerned about the human damage to somebody like Donna Rice than whether or not someone was going to get elected to an office. I thought she
Well, I
was really
mean,
good.
she saw the damage, and she was the one that actually fed poor Donna Rice to the wolves by
Yeah,
sending her down on the escalator and then running away. Um, she may have she didn't do anything particularly heroic. I mean, she didn't quit a job or anything, but I mean, she understood the problem. But going back to Lee Hart for a second, I think it's fair to ask why Hart dropped out in 1988, and 4 years later, in 1992, Bill Clinton survived a much worse scandal. And you have to wonder if it's because Lee Hart appeared humiliated. But as we see in this movie, I mean, you feel horrible for her. But Hillary Clinton toughed it out and went on the attack. And also because Clinton admitted he'd caused pain in his marriage, where Hart either denied it or refused to answer because it was beneath him. And it's also worth noting that Hart and his wife stayed married until she died 4 years ago.
yeah. I mean that it's very interesting story, and it just I it shows you that when the public at large and the media at large start judging
Yeah.
everyone's marriage according to the standards they have, maybe that's not fair. And maybe people have different kinds of relationships. And they did stay together until her death.
I also want to mention the campaign manager was played by the Oscar-winning character actor J.K. Simmons, who is one of the guys who everyone knows his face but not his name. He
Yeah.
he won the Oscar for Whiplash and is probably better known for being in the Farmers Insurance commercials.
I thought he was excellent as usual.
Yeah,
He's it's amazing how versatile he
yeah,
is
yeah,
and
yeah,
the different parts he's played. And which got me thinking it's really got to be more fun to be a good, well-respected character
yeah.
actor like that than a leading man who gets typecast into a certain kind of playing a certain kind of role. Um, but anyway, I thought he was really good.
Anyone else you want to talk about?
Well, I just say that I thought the reporters and the editors at the Miami Herald and the Washington Post were played mostly as stereotypes,
Yeah,
but decent stereotypes. I mean, there was enough truth there. But the stakeout scenes, which I was going to mention during our favorite scenes, the stakeout scenes in the car outside of Gary Hart's house, with the Bill Burr character, who's an alum of our podcast because
Yeah.
he played JFK in Frosted, but Bill Burr and the photographer and the reporter all in that car. Um, I thought those that acting and that staging was very good.
Yeah. It was fine.
And,
I mean, I agree with you. The acting in general was good.
and what about the director? What do you think of him?
Oh, I forgot to write down. You mentioned Up in the Air. He directed that. He's the director. He's the son of, I think it's Jason Reitman, who has directed a lot of your
The
favorite,
the,
the
the Ghostbuster.
Ghostbusters. I think
Yeah,
the vacation movies with Chevy Chase.
yeah.
So Ivan Reitman, I think he's a good director, and I don't have a problem with the directing per se, except that it was, as I said, a little frenetic in the build in the beginning, and it was hard to follow what was happening.
Yeah,
Uh,
he's like the Nepo baby that
yeah, he's a Nepo
deserves,
baby for sure.
but
Yeah,
deserves his own credit because yeah, I thought he was good. He did Thank You for Smoking, which movie
yeah,
I really enjoyed. And so he's legit in his own right. And we sort of started this, but we should sort of make a where are they now comment about the people portrayed here. Gary Hart is still alive.
yeah,
He served in various teaching and political appointee roles. He wrote books. He's 88 years old. He's made no known comments about how he was portrayed in this movie, whereas Lee and their daughter did go to a screening before Lee passed away, and was heard. This is third hand. Heard to say that the filmmakers really nailed it. They got it right. Donna Rice, she lived down her brush with scandal, I think, much better than, say, Monica Lewinsky or Fawn Hall of the Oliver North activities. She's 67 years old. She became a successful advocate for internet safety for kids. She was no babe in the woods, and this gets to maybe they wanted to portray her as a pathetic victim, but she was Don Henley of the Eagles' girlfriend before the heart affair ever happened. And you don't just go and associate in that world and be a total innocent, know nothing victim. She's now a Trump supporter. Both she and Gary Hart always, and continuously denied any sexual relationship whatsoever, which you can file away in the For What It's Worth file.
yeah. I know, and I think it's pretty clear in the movie that the movie makers think they did, because when Gary Hart talks to his wife, he doesn't say I didn't do it, and she just assumes that he did. So I think we're supposed to assume that there was more than smoke there. There was actual fire.
Yeah.
All right. Let's turn to the history. It's based on a book by Matt Bai, who was a screenwriter. I remember reading. I didn't read the book, but I read a long excerpt about this. I probably in the New Yorker, and the movie is pretty accurate to what the article and the book
Hmm.
said. I mean, what's
Well, I
your take
thought that,
on the
there were Hollywood effects, like staging that scene where the publisher of the Miami Herald and Gary Hart had a public, in front of everybody, debate about, you know, whether the coverage was fair and what Hart did and didn't do. That
yeah,
didn't happen. But I thought in catching the general ambiance and the political culture of the time and what it was like with the traveling press corps, the rough and tumble of newsrooms, the predilection of the press and public to love the salacious stuff and be bored by issues. I thought all in all, that was a pretty good and accurate depiction.
yeah, I think it was pretty accurate too. I mean, I don't understand why they do this sometimes, and maybe it's for legal reasons, but some of the named characters are real people, like Joe Trippi. Others, like the campaign manager, the editor of the Miami Herald and the Washington Post reporter, are completely fictional, but based on real, people. Some small details have been changed. For example, in real life, Hart told the New York Times to put a tail on him if they wanted to check out his personal life. In the movie, it's the Washington
Hmm.
Post. So all in all, I'll say it's pretty accurate. The one odd thing about the movie, though, is that it doesn't show the photo of Donna Rice sitting on Hart's lap on the monkey business.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
That photo was almost as damaging as the Miami Herald story itself. And no married man should ever be in a position to have a photo like that taken.
Well, that goes back to what I'm saying about how people have different ideas of what proper marriage and ideal marriage is all about. Others would say that's no big deal if it's just a party, if it, and people are having fun. Anyway, I think the other thing we have to say about history, and it's not a mistake, but they chose a pretty narrow focus um, in terms of their portrayal of 1988, which is a very, very interesting and impactful cycle in presidential politics, going way beyond the Hart episode. I mean, it was the last time a winner got 400 electoral votes. George Bush.
George Bush, yeah.
George Bush. It was very unusual for a third term in a row for one party. He was the first sitting Veep since Martin Van Buren to go directly from the vice presidency to the presidency. It was the last time a Republican carried California and Illinois, and it will be in our next lives, Gary, before that happens again. Jesse Jackson was the first serious Black candidate, winning major primaries during the primary battle. There were killer moments in debates, which usually don't matter. Quayle comparing himself to JFK in his debate with Benston, and Dukakis acting totally unfeeling when asked about the death penalty in his debate with George Bush. It was a year in which Bush sowed the seeds of his own later downfall by making that "read my lips, no new taxes" speech at his convention. And let's not forget, this was the first Joe Biden washout due to his plagiarism and serial lying. He was a candidate that year and had to be drummed out of the race for, I think, things that were actually much worse than what Gary Hart did. So anyone that really wants to get into this presidential cycle, because it was a very interesting cycle, the seminal work is Richard Ben Kramer's What It Takes. Yeah. It's about 1,000 pages long. It's hard to get through, but it goes into the detail and the ups and downs of every single one of these candidates.
The other thing I would mention is that, and is not mentioned in the movie, is that Gary Hart re-entered the campaign.
Yeah.
Back in, and entered the New Hampshire primary after he sat there for a couple months, thinking that maybe he'd made a mistake, and he completely flopped. I mean, at that point, he was ruined.
And the fact that they didn't mention it, I will put as a point on the board on my side of the debate over the film portraying him sympathetically. Okay. Because if they got into him going back into the race, that sort of takes away from those closing scenes where he finally says, "I can't do this to my family," because he did it to his family a couple months later.
Well, no one cared at that point. I mean,
I know.
No one was outside Lee Hart's house, not letting her out. Okay. Let's talk about our favorite scenes. You've already mentioned my favorite scene, where the Hart and the editor are on a panel, and it almost always happens that my favorite scenes are the ones that are invented. So I don't know what that says about Hollywood, but
like Churchill on the tube during World War II.
Churchill on the tube is a classic example. Yeah. It kind of feels true to life because what's interesting about that scene is how uncomfortable the editor feels, because he's not used to being put on the spot, and yet he still holds his ground. So it's kind of interesting. But what do you have kind of scenes?
Well, just imagine if that were today, and that kind of an editor was sitting on the dais at a Donald Trump speech. What would Trump have said to the editor?
I know. Well, first of all, that confluence of events wouldn't have happened.
Right. I like that. I mentioned it already. I like the whole surveillance scene,
Uh-huh. Okay.
from the following Donna Rice up on the airplane to the camping out in the smelly car outside of the Georgetown townhouse with Bill Burr and the reporter and the photographer. It was both humorous and suspenseful. The music was good. It was very well directed too. I thought that was my favorite scene.
And it's pretty accurate to the way Matt Bai described it in the article. I mean, especially even to the confrontation scene behind the townhouse when Gary Hart comes out and says, "What are you guys doing here?" Uh,
Yeah.
I like the scenes where Hart is with Bob Dole because Dole is so acerbic and droll. It reminded me of how Dole was considered a real wit before he became so cranky and became a cranky old man after he got the Republican nomination in 1996. I mean, I think Dole was completely undone because he couldn't believe he was losing to a sleazebag like Bill Clinton, and he just stopped being funny after that. But for a while he was pretty funny.
Yeah, I like the I like the press conference scene toward the end where Hart finally goes before the press
Yeah.
and addresses the charges. And first of all, I remember this actual press conference pretty vividly. But what I don't remember how masterful Hart was through most of the press conference. I mean, if you watch that scene, he's brilliant. He is winning the days, kicking it. And then one stammering question comes from the Post reporter. Have you ever committed adultery? And Hart blows it. He stammers himself. He hems and haws and says, I don't think that's a fair question. I remember that soundbite. That's all people remember. And I like this scene because it showed you how a politician, we've probably all seen this ourselves, seen this maybe with people we were working for. They're doing so well, and then they go out on a banana peel.
Well, obviously, he should have anticipated that question.
Yeah,
And it was his arrogance that thought that he wouldn't be asked it.
sort of like what would you do differently from Joe Biden question.
Yeah. Yeah. Or, and obviously when Bill Clinton went on 60 Minutes, he was asked that question and he answered it and he kind of said yes. But that's not important. And but he wasn't, Hart wasn't willing to do that. I also liked the various scenes where the editors of the Washington Post are sitting around commenting on the stories they're going to run. There are a bunch of cynical guys trying to outquip each other. We saw the
Yeah,
same.
that's always fun. That's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
fun.
I mean, we saw the same thing happen
All
in
the President's
President's
Men. It was
Men.
great. Yeah.
We commented on it in that movie. It's just fun when these guys, they're so hard bitten and cynical, and they're like, yip, 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 they're
Well,
making
they're performing. That's the thing.
performing for each other.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about some favorite lines. What have you got?
Um, Once again, the real line is the best.
Okay.
As we've seen in a number of these movies, put a tail on me, follow me around. You'll be very bored. That is a true line. And that, in so many of these movies, the best lines are the ones that really happened. And I thought that was a good line.
All right. I said that I enjoyed the Washington Post sessions. I've got two from there. Bob Woodward said, Gary Hart, he could win it. I mean, he's got the hair. And someone else says, how many points do you think the hair is worth? And Ben Bradley says 6 points, 4 if it's windy. And then reporter says about Lee Hart, he says, I heard she looks the other way. And David Broder says, seems pretty ideal to me. Bradley says, sounds like a zipper story. Another reporter says, what's the candidate's position on zippers? And Woodward says he prefers them open.
I'm sure this is all realistic.
I'm sure it
It
happened.
really
Just
is.
like that. There's a bug right there.
I like the J.K. Simmons line because he was playing the part he was supposed to play
Yeah.
when he was sitting around with the young whippersnapper staffers on
Yeah.
Gary Hart's campaign, and he's shooting down all their ideas. He's saying, nah, nah. There's no opening up, no parents, no barbecues. And the young staff, but what about showing Gary as a real person? And then J.K. Simmons, he starts screaming, he's not a real regular person. He's the next effing president of the United effing States. And I think that capsulates the sort of the arrogance that you were talking about,
Right.
but also the self-conscious way they wanted to posture themselves.
Right.
No barbecues.
No barbecues, no People magazine. I mean, God forbid you should actually show yourself to be personable and likable. At one of the things that Bob Dole's at, Gary Hart says, "Oh, Tom Brokaw's here," and Dole says, "I guess they're really curious about your economics plan."
Yeah, that was great. That was great. Again, I think that was a major point they wanted to get across in this movie. There was one ironically hilarious line that you almost could miss because it was so fleeting. But it's when all of the press jackals were hanging around Lee Hart's house.
Yeah.
The big camp out after the scandal broke, and they were trashing the lawn and making noise and just waiting for any glimmer of life from inside the house. And Joe Trippi, the campaign aide, arrives on location to go in and help take care of Lee Hart and their daughter, help comfort them. And he has to push his way through, the crowd, the pack of journalists. And he's pushing his way and saying, no comment, no comment. And just as he breaks through to go into the house, a female reporter mutters, what an asshole. And I think that's because talk about the pot calling the kettle black, because she was stating exactly what they were all acting like.
Yeah.
And she was calling him that. I just thought that was an ironic touch. I really like that.
Okay, so you've poo-pooed my concern about Gary Hart's marital, escapades, but one of my other favorite lines is when Lee Hart says to him, "Were you thinking of me when you were flirting with this girl? Were you thinking of me on that boat when you were making her laugh in front of 50 other people? Were you thinking of me when you invited her into our home?"
Yeah.
I guess we may have different views of marriage, but I think a husband owes his wife some respect. And, when he's letting her sit on his lap and have the picture taken, he's not showing respect to his wife. And
Yeah, I'm not vouching for all of his conduct. I'm just saying any one thing you can't necessarily read everything into. But I actually had in my favorite lines another very sad line from her, which she said, "The one thing I ever asked is that you don't embarrass me."
right.
Which, by the way, also is a tell about the kind of marriage they had.
Right.
But it's still a very sad and touching line.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk about the relevance or comparison to politics today.
Oh gosh, it's all so relevant.
I know, right?
All the questions about whether the media should focus on personalities and the horse race aspects of presidential politics rather than the substance. And what makes this question so tough is because while everybody says they like substance, almost everyone is lying. They will much sooner click on the personality stuff and the scandals and not on the substance stuff.
Yeah, I would say it's totally relevant because a sexual scandal has been weaponized in politics today in a way that's makes it more relevant than ever. Each side has harnessed sex accusations against the other and is usually surprised when they don't work. Clarence Thomas, Bill Clinton, Brett Kavanaugh, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump have all been accused of sexual improprieties and all survived to the disgust of their accusers. You'd think by now politicians would learn not to do things that will get them in trouble. And you'd also think that political opponents would figure out that this tactic doesn't usually work.
Yeah, so why should they learn?
Why should they learn? But
but I think the movie also raises the question of how politicians should try to deal with things in their past,
right.
if they are only in the past. Maybe Obama had the right approach. let it all out in some best-selling books and make money while you're confessing. Americans like confessionals if they are followed by reformed behavior.
Right. Well, I
And
mean, it's the
yeah,
basic Christian theology. I
yeah.
mean, you have to repent, but that
And you
doesn't
get a second chance.
give you a get out of free jail to keep doing it and then repent again. I
Right.
mean, you got to really mean it when you repent.
And also, I think tremendously relevant, and I'd say especially relevant for the Democrats as they think about how to try to remake themselves for the future, is this whole question of authenticity
Yeah.
in politics. As I mentioned, I think that was Hart's biggest handicap, is that he was not seen as an authentic guy. This happens to be regarded as a Trump strength. Love him or hate him. The good, the bad, and the ugly are all right out there for everyone to see. The accent and the conduct and the behavior doesn't change from audience to audience, from state to state, where while others are putting on different accents depending on what part of the country they're in. And so I think the whole question of how do you portray authenticity, who you really are, is tremendously relevant for today. Of course, to do that successfully, you have to be authentic.
You have to know who you are
Yeah.
and be proud of it. Okay, if you were a high school teacher, would you assign this movie?
I know, but maybe in an undergrad journalism class, I think it
Yeah,
might be
that
an
sounds about
interesting
right.
respite. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, any teacher who assigns a movie that revolves around sexual infidelity is asking for trouble. So, would not. How would you grade it?
I grade it as a B. It was a well-made, well-acted film whose subject matter was just small potatoes.
Yeah, I made it a B minus. The difference between a B minus is not that big. It felt like it didn't quite stick the landing, and but yeah, it was fine. I would recommend it to political junkies like
Yeah.
ourselves, and to people that don't care about the 1988 campaign, I would say you might want to give that one a pass. Okay. So, any other closing words? I mean, I want to say, as usual, that the podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and most podcast platforms. You can subscribe there, and I hope you do. Any comments, you can send them to me at GaryHolmes76 at Gmail. Our next movie is going to be The Patriot, starring Mel Gibson. The internet seems unclear whether George Washington is a character in this movie or not, but even if he's not, we're getting closer to the sesquicentennial Declaration of Independence, so it's worth taking another look at the Revolutionary War period. Any other final comments, Jim?
I'm looking forward to that. If it wasn't for the events portrayed in The Patriot, we wouldn't have 47 presidencies to talk about on this podcast.
Ha! You're right. We only had about I mean 15 kings and queens since then, so
Yeah.
it would be not a very long podcast.
Yeah. And since there's never going to be another election, according to some, we've got to get all these licks in while we can.
All right, Jim. I'll talk to you later.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.